Psychedelic drugs have been used by humans for thousands of years. In recent history, they have been fundamental for major breakthroughs in science. Francis Crick figured out the structure of DNA on an LSD trip. And Carey Mullis figured out the polymerase chain reaction, a method of replicating DNA, also on an LSD trip. Both received Nobel Prizes and created huge leaps in the advancement of modern-day medicine. Who knows how many discoveries have been missed due to the ban of these mind-expanding tools?
Researchers at a Norwegian university have looked back at early medical trials of LSD and found evidence it could be used to treat alcoholism.
Psilocybin decreases the amount of activity that's occurring, therefore decreasing activities associated with depression.
California state law where medical marijuana appears to be helping so many people with cancer.
They take ayahuasca as a medicine. They say it's a medicine for the body and the soul.
Do you think magic mushrooms growing atop cow shit was an accident? Where do you think the phrase, "that's good shit," came from? Why do you think Hindus think cows are holy? Holy shit.
The Good Friday experiment was an attempt to take the tools of science to look at this question: can psychedelics, in this case psilocybin, catalyze a religious mystical experience? Because these people were divinity students at the time, most of them were ministers after all these years. And many of them reported that they had had non-drug mystical experiences in their life after the Good Friday experiment. And that gave them a point of reference to compare to their drug experience. And these people compared it in a way that it was, again, either identical or very similar to, but they determined in their view that their psilocybin experience was genuinely mystical.
The core of what we found in our studies in healthy volunteers at Johns Hopkins is that there is this quantum change, if you will, in terms of perception of life and self and attitudes and moods and behavior. Most people are still endorsing that this experience is among the most personally meaningful and spiritually significant experiences of their entire lives.
So we can now actually study the mystical experience, or transcendent experience is maybe a better term for it, transpersonal experience, with pharmacological tools, using scientific tools. I think that's a huge accomplishment and a huge sort of break from the way it's always been.
When they started talking about what the implications of that experience had been for their life, that's when I started understanding what to me felt like one of the keys to the 1960s, to the cultural revolution of the 60s. They felt that they were motivated to be part of the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the women's rights movement, the environmental movement.
The hippies in the 60s, I mean, we had a racial bias a lot of places, but the hippies were black and white and yellow and every other color because those barriers came down in people who took psychedelics. Those cultural barriers were gone and they could see through that. It was a transparency, and they said, well, he's just like me. She's just like me. We're all part of this thing. And if they had mystical experiences, it was even more profound because they realized everything is all part. Everything is all one.
A hallmark feature to the mystical experience is one in which there's just a sense of the interconnectedness of all people and things, a sense that all is one.
So the Dalai Lama walks into a pizza shop.
Cosa shop?
Pizza shop. Pizza?
Pizza shop, yes.
Yeah, pizza shop. And says, "Can you make me one with everything?"
Magic mushrooms have been used to treat depression, with success rates of up to 80% in clinical trials. They have also been used to medicate otherwise untreatable cluster headaches, and most psychedelics are implicated in spiritual growth, helping users break bad habits.
In the 1950s and 60s, doctors hailed psychedelic drugs as the magic bullet for everything from alcoholism to depression. Non-addictive and highly potent, psychedelic drugs seemed the answer to therapists' prayers. Even the CIA financed research into LSD. But then the counterculture adopted LSD as the ultimate recreational high. Washington banned it, and scientific research into all psychedelics ground to a halt.
I went from being a math major with a minor in Chinese language to the next day I wanted to stand and hug trees. And I mean literally, I was a barefoot hippie overnight.
The drug was administered in a drink of water given at...
In the 1960s, it was taken up by the army, who tested it on their troops to see if it could eventually be used in battle to incapacitate the enemy.
25 minutes later, the first effects of the drug became apparent. The men began to relax and to giggle. After 35 minutes, one of the radio operators had become incapable of using his set. But 1 hour and 10 minutes after taking the drug, with one man climbing a tree to feed the birds, the troop commander gave up, admitting that he could no longer control himself or his men.
But later that decade, when LSD leaked out into the recreational market, it panicked the establishment and was made an illegal Class A drug. Many experts today believe the dangers of LSD are more fiction than fact.
It's physiologically non-toxic. No one has ever died from an overdose of LSD. It's true, I think, 1 or 2 people in the 60s jumped out of windows, but that's become a myth which goes on flapping its wings through history.
I myself have caught a girl trying to jump out of a window on LSD, so I wouldn't call it a myth. Psychedelics are in fact quite dangerous, and at least for the first few times should only be used under strict supervision, as a therapeutic tool, either by a psychedelic psychotherapist or a shaman. All these disaster stories have something in common. The users were either spiked or had no idea what they were taking, were under the influence of alcohol or other drugs, and were not using the drug as a therapeutic tool. I myself have used LSD to break addictions to other drugs successfully, and I know it has great therapeutic value, and I think it's important not to make the same mistakes that were made in the 60s, encouraging reckless use, and we must treat these psychoactive compounds with the respect they deserve.
The first LSD trip was so smooth, and I was like, probably like a baby who's exploring something.
Almost immediately after completing her LSD treatment, Janka started to perceive a change in her emotional state.
Something a psychotherapy could not do in about 2 or 3 years, LSD turned it within a moment. Before LSD, I was afraid of death. Now I think about death in a different way. I'm friend with death. Before I was scared and I was angry with death.
The founder of Alcoholics Anonymous used LSD to stop his addiction. However, its use has had to be replaced by a new first step, submitting to a higher power. Studying the benefits of illegal drugs is notoriously difficult. Scientists in America trying to get funding from NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, are aware they can only get funding if their studies are aimed at looking at the negative effects of drugs. Legalization will allow future research into these powerful tools and hopefully herald further breakthroughs in the sciences. Cannabis is the most popular and commonly used recreational drug in the world. It once held a place as an important medicine. The physician to Queen Victoria, J.R. Reynolds, writing in the medical journal The Lancet, said, "When pure and administered carefully, cannabis is one of the most valuable medicines we possess."
Hi Larry, how are you? Come in, come in. Let's see. How you feeling? It's been a bit of a rough week. Really? And the best way to take it is put it under your tongue and rub it in your cheek. Don't do too much, you're going to be asleep all afternoon. You know what you should do? No. Don't try to communicate, just relax. See what happens.
We know from animal experiments that the endogenous cannabinoid system is very important in regulating motor activity, the very type of activity that is impaired in Parkinson's disease. From animal experiments, we also know that boosting certain branches of the endocannabinoid system is helpful in relieving symptoms of Parkinson's. Finally, from anecdotal information, we know that certain patients who smoke marijuana experience relief of their symptoms.
I think you're calmed down. So quickly. Isn't that amazing?
He used just a single drop, and his hands afterwards were rock steady, and the dyskinesia left.
The voice is coming back. It works most of the time. Exactly. Did you guys eat lunch? Are you hungry now?
20 a.m.
Actually,
a person like me could really use marijuana. It makes me pretty angry that I can't get it in my home state.
The number one frustration that I have is knowing that there is this untapped potential comes from what marijuana is teaching us to generate new medicines and being stuck because of financial issues or political issues. That is extremely frustrating.
We now know that medical marijuana controls dyskinesia, and yet it's not available to us.
Why them say you must not use the herb? You see? And we check that and we can't find, we just see them just say, no, you mustn't use it because it makes you rebel. Against what?
One common fear about cannabis is it is a schizophrenogenic. In the UK, cannabis use has increased 20-fold in the last 40 years. However, schizophrenia incidence has slightly reduced in this time. A compound called CBD, found in cannabis, has antipsychotic effects, and it seems more likely that people with mental disorders are trying to medicate against the anxiety of their condition with the drug, rather than the drug causing the symptoms.
We looked at the evidence. I think we must have gone through about 2,000 papers, and it doesn't cause schizophrenia. Maybe there are some individuals with schizophrenia in which the illness is brought on perhaps a little earlier because they smoke cannabis.
There often is what's called a precipitating event. A precipitating event is something like an important loss of a person, a severe car accident.
It certainly can be exacerbated by a number of drugs.
You know, a bad alcohol trip, that could serve as a precipitating event too. The fact is, schizophrenia has a prevalence of about 1% the world around. Cannabis use, let's start with the 60s, it's gone up like that.
So, you've introduced this new thing. If it's schizophrenic, we should see a significant uptick in schizophrenia. We should see more people with schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia has stayed just like that.
In all of the epidemiologic studies that I'm aware of, there is no uptick. So if marijuana causes schizophrenia, it was introduced, now we should have more schizophrenia. We don't see that.
In Jamaica, marijuana is part of everyday life. Up to 70% of the island's population smokes it.
Yes, Jah bless us all and sanctify us as we partake of this holy herb for the healing of the nation and for the meditation of man. It gives you more insight into yourself, into reality.
Within 4 seconds of the first drag, muscles relax, eyes redden, pulse rate quickens, euphoria, heightened sensitivity, or paranoid feelings arise in the user, an experience that dates back to the dawn of time.
Herodotus records some of the earliest uses of cannabis by the Scythians. And what they did was they would build a big bonfire in the middle of the camp, and they would heap a bunch of marijuana on top of it, and then they would throw a tent over it, and they would all go under the tent and breathe the smoke. And that way they consumed it.
Next to opium, marijuana is one of the planet's oldest medicines. Ancient Chinese herbalists applied it to stomach pain, menstrual cramps, malaria, and consumption. According to Indian mythology, Shiva, the Hindu goddess of creation and destruction, endowed man with the plant for a joyful pastime. An apt legacy for the drug of the generation that preached free love, challenged authority, and was out to change the world.
Since the 1970s, the war on drugs has cost more than $2 trillion taxpayer dollars, but it hasn't eliminated marijuana. In fact, marijuana is so widespread that 41% of Americans admit to trying it, including even the president.
I realized when I was like 30 years old that I was tricked. I was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me.
1974, the Heath-Tulin study. Ronald Reagan announces, the most reliable scientific sources say permanent brain damage is one of the inevitable results of the use of marijuana. Monkeys pumped full of marijuana, apparently 30 joints a day, had begun to atrophy and die after 90 days. Brain damage was determined after counting the dead brain cells of both monkeys who had been subjected to the marijuana and ones who had not. This study became the foundation of the government, and other special interest groups claim that marijuana kills brain cells. Here's what they didn't tell you. After 6 years of requests, how the study was conducted was finally revealed. Instead of administering 30 joints a day for 1 year, Dr. Heath used a method of pumping 63 Colombian-strength joints through a gas mask within 5 minutes over 3 months.
They suffocated the monkeys. What they did is they put these gas masks basically on their face and they pumped pot into it, but without additional oxygen. So after X amount of time, the brain shut down. Well, if you suffocate, the first thing that's going to happen is your brain cells are going to die with lack of oxygen. So what they did is they suffocated the monkey, showed all these dead brain cells, and then went on to associate it by saying that cannabis use causes your brain cells to die. And how many people, not knowing the origin of the study, have gone on to quote it and re-quote it. And now people believe it.
Studies since have shown no signs of any brain cell damage. In 2005, new research suggested that marijuana could possibly stimulate brain cell growth. That study hasn't received the same attention.
Finally, a study came out just in the last month verifying that cannabis smoke does not cause cancer. It's different than nicotine.
Despite objections from the American Medical Association, Anslinger persuades Congress to outlaw the drug in 1937.
Marijuana is important to the cartels because it really is the lifeblood, the economic lifeblood for how these cartels operate.
60% of their revenue, or around $8.6 billion, comes from trafficking marijuana.
Marijuana it's almost like printing press for them. It's really the engine that drives all of their other narcotic trafficking activities.
Federal government officials say this all the time. There's no study showing that marijuana is an effective medicine. And you know something? They're right. However, it's beyond hypocrisy for them because it's the federal government that controls the marijuana, and numbers of reputable groups, the Centers for Disease Control, the University of California, and others have requested to conduct the studies, and they've been deprived of that authorization.
So there's no research because the government hasn't allowed the research?
The government affirmatively does not allow this research to take place, and then they sanctimoniously say, well, there's no research that shows it. It's beyond hypocrisy. I view it as chutzpah.
A search of the U.S. patent database reveals numerous large pharmaceutical companies have filed recent patents claiming their cannabinoid receptor drug has the potential to treat almost everything: multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, rheumatoid arthritis, Tourette's, epilepsy, heart disease, obesity, various mental illnesses, and the holy grail of medicine, a cancer cure. By avoiding the plant, they get around the controversies and complications of its Schedule I status.
These immune cells get transformed and they become cancer. To our surprise, we found that these cancer cells continue to express these CB2 receptors.
This was an exciting discovery because the CB2 receptor can act like a target for the cannabinoids. Once they bind with the receptor, they can tell the cancer cell to die.
So basically telling the cells to commit suicide, and that's what they do. And we demonstrated that that would be the mechanism by which the cannabinoids can kill the cancer, and therefore it can be used effectively as an anti-cancer agent.
Dr. Nagar-Katti and his researchers were able to eradicate almost 100% of the cancer in test tubes. But they were skeptical they would see similar results when they moved on to tumors in mice.
To our surprise, we found that almost 25 to 30% of the mice completely rejected the tumor. They were completely cured. And in addition, we found that the remaining mice also, there was a significant reduction in the volume or the size of the tumors as well.
The lab results have been so promising that Dr. Nagar-Katti is beginning clinical trials with leukemia patients.
When people ask me, like, so what's the most important thing you learned? By far, the most important thing I learned was that THC and CBD can kill cancer cells, that they can kill cancer cells while leaving healthy cells intact. They trigger a programmed cell death, which is called apoptosis. And not only do they trigger apoptosis, but they prevent the cancer cells from being invasive, from metastasizing. They prevent a growing tumor from signaling that it needs more blood supply, which is called angiogenesis. So cannabinoids, not just as a treatment for nausea and decreased appetite that happens because of chemotherapy, but cannabinoids actually being chemotherapy, actually treating cancer. That's really exciting to me.
You know, what's so interesting is the medical marijuana community is better educated than the doctors. And I think that what we should all take home from that is that as you learn and understand this stuff, it means we have to make the changes. We have to interact with our government. We have to reshape how energy flows through them so that this phase change will occur. All of us have to participate in it. You know, we want to see the Berlin Wall fall.
So I'm a cancer doctor, and every day I see patients with cancer who have nausea from their chemotherapy or their cancer, loss of appetite, pain, depression, insomnia. And my experience over the past 30 years of being an oncologist is that there's one medicine that I could recommend to patients that can take care of all of those problems. Instead of writing 5 different prescription drugs, all of which have side effects and addictive potential, I can tell my cancer patients to try marijuana to take care of any combination of those symptoms.
Dozens of major studies have been published in the last few years that indicate that the chemicals in cannabis, in the lab and in animals, have a significant effect on fighting almost all major cancers, including brain, breast, prostate, lung, thyroid, colon, skin, pituitary, melanoma, and leukemia cancers. They do this by promoting the death of cancer cells that have forgotten how to die, as well as a reduction in their crucial blood supply, while leaving healthy cells untouched.
This is Kayvon, one of the co-owners.
When was the first time you smoked marijuana?
I was 15 years old. I was in my buddy's basement. It was interesting. Like most kids today, I have attention issues, And it's something that really put me in a place where I could think and get my work done. I graduated high school when I was 16, been living on my own since I was 16, graduated college when I was 19. So I saw that marijuana didn't have the negative effects on my mind and my body that people said it did. And I've always fought for people to have that right to smoke marijuana if they so choose to.
It's the CBD that scientists think modulates electrical and chemical activity to help quiet the excessive activity in the brain that causes seizures. The government was saying it had no medicinal value and had a high potential for abuse. All reasons why the Figgies stayed away from marijuana. Until this. This is their daughter, Charlotte, having a seizure.
We just thought it was just one random febrile seizure.
By the time she was 2, though, the seizures had become constant and started to take their toll on their once happy, joyful little girl.
She started to really decline cognitively, and she was slipping away, and she just wasn't keeping up with her twin.
The Figgies finally found an answer. It was awful news. Dravet syndrome. Many Dravet kids die young, in early childhood. Charlotte was almost 3. For the next 2 years, the Figgies tried everything. Strange diets, acupuncture, and dozens of powerful drugs like Valium, Ativan, phenobarbital. But nothing seemed to help. Even worse, some of the medications nearly killed her.
After 1 dose, she stops breathing, and after 2 doses, her heart will stop.
Did you have to do CPR then on her yourself?
Yes. I remember when her heart stopped and I had her pulse, and I lost her pulse. There was just nothing. The ambulance is on its way.
She survived. Matt had been deployed to Afghanistan, and the only thing he could do to help was start scouring the internet. And he stumbled onto this video of a child using marijuana.
So how's everything going? Jaden had 4 days without a seizure.
I'm like, wow, having success on specifically Dravet, this is interesting, it's natural.
And while he couldn't ever imagine taking marijuana himself, he was now in the stunning position of recommending it for Charlotte. As a last resort, doctors wanted to either prescribe a powerful veterinary drug used on epileptic dogs or put Charlotte in a medically induced coma so her brain and body could rest. For Paige, those were not good options. But maybe, just maybe, marijuana now was. She tried the Stanley Special Marijuana, and again, it worked.
I can't tell you what that means to us.
Get you, doesn't it, a little bit?
If it doesn't get you, something's wrong with you. She lived her life in a catatonic state. Now her parents get to meet her for the first time. What a revelation.
Yeah, Kitty.
The child who had had 300 seizures a week was now down to just 1 every 7 days.
It is Charlotte's plan.
It's Charlotte's plan. Not anymore. Now it's for all the children.
More than 41 children are using Charlotte's Web here in Colorado. All of them are reporting significant seizure reduction. And there are dozens more on a wait list, hoping, praying that a plant could change their lives.
I made it.
Scientists in Israel are learning that marijuana use might actually protect the brain, not damage it.
They've been able to show that it can decrease the amount of brain damage from head injuries in mice.
To be able to give a medicine after the injury to reverse some of the damage, that's huge.
I want to paint my nails.
You want to paint your nails? I'll paint your nails.
I literally see Charlotte's brain making connections that haven't been made in years. It's almost seeming to build her brain, where before it seemed broken.
And while scientists are still at the very early stages of knowing if this is actually happening, I can tell you it was remarkable to see her progress. In the 3 months since we first met her, we saw a change. She was now talking more.
Say puppy. Yeah.
She's horseback riding.
Good girl.
She even rides a bike on her own. And the special strain made for Charlotte is now named for her. It's Charlotte's Web.
Graham, a British war veteran, wishes to remain anonymous.
I basically suffered a high-velocity bullet to the back of the head.
Graham found that hash helped his injuries in a number of ways.
I suppose it has three areas of effect for me. One is a reduction in pain from hypersensitivity. The second was a sort of cushioning of me emotionally from the onslaught and continuous fight to deal with all these things. And the third thing, I suppose, was the reduction in spasticity and clonus reaction. Now, in a sense, one recreational drug, however you want to term it.
Did all three.
Did all three.
Diaphragmatic flutter.
It's fluttering here. It's annoying, but it becomes painful pretty quickly, I imagine. Yeah,
after like 15, 20 minutes is where I can like start to really feel.
He's about to show me how the marijuana works. He's been convulsing now for 7 minutes.
How quickly do you expect this to work?
Within like the first 5 minutes. And I'm done. Like,
that's it.
That's it.
It was actually less than a minute.
Depending on the attack in the day, like, it'll work within the first couple hits.
Hear how his voice is completely different. By 16, Chaz was taking these powerful, addictive, potentially deadly narcotics and muscle relaxants daily, like Valium and morphine.
It would be safe to say that marijuana, what you have in your hand there, is better than all those pills for you in terms of treating what's going on?
Yeah, I'm not zombified. I've had 16, 17 attacks today, and I'm still sitting up talking to you. My first attack on all these, I'd be in the hospital.
I'm a firm believer that marijuana has actually saved my son's life.
I have multiple sclerosis.
When we first met Greg, his shaking was so severe that he informed us that he would need a few puffs of marijuana in order to participate in the interview. The difference was night and day.
I mean, just look at me. Is it not blatantly obvious that I have just enjoyed however many tokes? I look happy.
Just today, an article came out describing how the endocannabinoid system was modulating the synapses of glutaminergic and gamma neurons in our brain, and how certain mutations in some of the involved proteins forming synapses in the brain are modified in people with autism. So we see a link between autism and the endocannabinoid system, and that's been pioneered by a woman in California, Miko Hester Perez, who has a severely autistic son. And in desperation, she got a permit for him and gave him cannabis, and it changed everything. So today, after she's been doing this for a few years, we now have a scientific validation.
I'm trying not to get too choked up here, but I actually have some good friends that have an autistic son. And there's more research coming out all the time about these cannabinoids, the CBD. Not the tetrahydrocannabinol, but the cannabidiol, and what it can do for kids that have autism or that are having seizures and all of these other things. And you know, it's just sad. We know that there's medicinal value to cannabis, and the government knows damn well that there's medicinal value to cannabis. And the fact that they don't let our universities research it is it's a crying shame.
I don't want to be on narcotics, and I don't want to be on this, that, or the other thing, with, you know, the mile-long list of side effects, when I can take this natural plant inexpensively, and for those who want to grow it at home, we should have that right. How can the government tell us we can't grow a plant? I mean, how ludicrous is that in the land of the free? Free for who?
We pump CO2 into this environment because the plants can accept up to 1,500 parts per million of it. We're in a city, so you have constant pollution. If you could pull that CO2 out of the environment, store it, and use it in your facility, that would also be another great way to help, you know, your surrounding area that you're growing in.
So, Mike, what makes hemp such a great crop?
Well, it's a very fast-growing crop, and because it's so fast-growing, the farmer doesn't have to put any pesticides on it, so it grows very quickly. It swamps out all of the weeds and puts fibre back into the soil, By the time this crop has grown and been processed by Ian for hempcrete, that's probably locked up somewhere in the region of 1.4 tonnes of carbon per tonne of hemp. So it's taking CO2 out the atmosphere and locking it up, as well as providing environmental benefits for the farm.
We've been trying to find a method of building that's low carbon and energy efficient, simple and affordable, that uses natural materials. Hemp and lime mixed together seems to answer all of those needs.
I don't know, 50,000? 250,000? 300,000? For marijuana, I'd probably say then 80,000.
I would say it would be hundreds of billions.
Get ready for it. Here it comes.
There are no deaths from cannabis anywhere. You can't find one.
In 10,000 years of known use of marijuana, there's never been a single death attributed to marijuana. There's 400,000 deaths in America alone every year that are directly attributed to tobacco.
$400 million is spent annually in Canada arresting and prosecuting marijuana crimes. The total budget in Canada for all drugs is $500 million. That means 4/5 of the drug budget goes towards arresting and prosecuting marijuana users, leaving 1/5 for crack, heroin, coke, crystal meth, the date rape drug, whatever.
About 85% of everybody in our country that uses any form of illicit substance whatsoever uses only marijuana. And so if you were to remove those people from the criminal justice system, the sheer number of everyone else in the country using every other illegal drug combined would not justify this colossal bureaucracy we have to fight the war on drugs. It would fall apart. If you lose marijuana prohibition, you lose drug prohibition, and the government knows it. They don't want to give that up because of the sheer money involved.
Going down the path to legalization in this country is reckless and irresponsible. It scares us. The treatment people are afraid. The education people are afraid. Law enforcement is worried what is going to happen.
Adolescents, starting about age 13, have a pretty mature brain reward center, so they can experience rewards and pleasures the same way adults can. But the problem with that is that their prefrontal cortex, which helps people think ahead, control their impulses, that's not fully developed until age 24. That explains why adolescents are much more vulnerable.
I was traveling around the north of Thailand. Orange Haze 1, it's a very, very fine sativa, and it has a very nice mental high. And I met a very old medicine man, and he was treating heroin junkies with marijuana. And he said to me that this plant has very, very big value for society. And he also said that the plant was so powerful that in the future it could overthrow governments.
There are more kids in addiction clinics for marijuana than any other substance. This must mean that marijuana is the most addictive substance today.
It's undoubtedly true that there are more teenagers and kids in treatment for marijuana than all the other drugs combined. What the DEA never tells you is why that's true.
A kid is caught possessing or smoking marijuana. He's taken to court. He's given a choice. Either you some horrible penalty, or you go to a treatment center. Obviously chooses to go to treatment, and goes to treatment there, he's considered an addict.
But then the DEA gets to point to that stat and say, look at all these kids in treatment for marijuana. God, it must be because today's marijuana is not the marijuana that your parents were smoking.
As far as I understand, only 3% of the people in treatment for marijuana are there voluntarily. The other 97% were told to by their guardian or told to by a judge. So you can choose between jail or treatment. A lot of people choose treatment.
From beat cop to police chief, I saw ample evidence of the harm caused by alcohol and the absence of evidence caused by marijuana use. And I mean the complete absence. I cannot recall a single case in which marijuana contributed to domestic violence, crimes of theft, and the like.
Ooh, yeah.
worth much more than gold. We're jamming, 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 and we're jamming in the name of the Lord. We're jamming, 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 we're jamming right straight from your sing. Holy Mount Zion, Holy Mount Zion, just seated in Mount Zion. It rules all creation. Here we're jamming. Pop Chihuahua, we're jamming. See, I wanna jam it with you. We're jamming, 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 and jam down, hope you're jamming too. Jano's a matter of pride, the truth again is high, to keep you satisfied.